Hello, everybody. It's Mike Yao with Savage Kingdoms role-playing game and Fire in the Head Productions. So today's video is about Savage Kingdoms 4th edition. It's specifically about the attributes and derived traits of a character, or whether it's a player character, non-player character. Most monsters will have these as well. Things that you will encounter in the Savage Kingdoms 4th edition role-playing game, which is coming soon, probably in March or April, probably April. The core rulebook. So we're currently playtesting. We're probably 97% done with playtesting. And in writing, I have most of the playtest rules written out. That'll become the core rulebook. About 90% full there. So there's still time to make some changes that we may or may not discover during playtesting, that sort of thing. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. However, it is to preface the current subject of the video, which is, like I said earlier, we're going to talk about the attributes, the 6 attributes of a character in Savage Kingdoms, and the 6 derived traits. I think it's 6, maybe there's 7. We'll see. We'll see how many I can remember. So starting off with attributes. So attributes are one of the core pillars of a character, right? And they're kind of similar to ability scores in Dungeons and Dragons. That's what they're called, ability scores there. Some people call them stats. Some people even call them attributes. Technically, they're called ability scores. In Savage Kingdoms, they are technically and officially called attributes. And there's 6 of them, and they kind of correlate to the D&D ones. I on purpose did use different names for them. And so we'll just start from there. So on your character sheet, in alphabetical order, they would appear as such. You have agility, physique, vigor, intellect, magnetism, and willpower. And so you might think, well, Mr. Mike, that's not really alphabetical order, is it? It kind of sort of is, but not entirely. That's because kind of like in D&D, at least in 5th edition and 3rd edition, anywhere from 2nd edition onwards, they listed the first 3 ability scores. Those are your mostly physical ones, right? And then your kind of mental / spiritual, emotional, psychological stats or ability scores would be the final 3 ones, right? So I'm kind of doing the same thing in Savage Kingdoms. So you have agility, physique, and vigor. Those are very physical. Then you have intellect, magnetism, and willpower, which are very mental and I guess to some degree spiritual, non-physical. So to break those down a little bit, so we have agility. Agility is kind of, I guess, equivalent to dexterity. I just prefer the term agility. A lot of games use agility, actually. So yeah, nothing new under the sun right there. Attributes start at +0 is average, right? So the average person in the setting would have a +0 in probably 5 out of 6 attributes. And player characters get to start with a little bit more than that. So in past editions of Savage Kingdoms, you started with a total of +3 in your attributes. So when you character create, and by the way, in Savage Kingdoms, there's no random roll for ability scores. Although in past editions, I did give you a way of doing that. It doesn't really kind of work. It's better to craft your abilities, which most people prefer anyway. And so, for example, you want to end up with a total of +4 in the new edition. It used to be +3. Now you get to start with up to +4 total attributes. So, meaning that, say, you choose to have a -1 agility and a +3 physique and a +2. Anyway, all of those 6 attributes have to total out to +4 at character creation, or less. It could be less if you really wanted to. Anyway, they can't be above +4. And then every through advancement, you gain a +1 in an attribute every so often. I think it's advancements 4, 7, 10, 13, 16, 19 now. So it used to be, actually maybe it still is. I need to look at the advancement chart again, you would think. And again, we're still tweaking stuff, so it may not be official. It used to be at advancements 3, 5, 7, or wait, 3, 6, 9, 12. So now it might be 4, 7. I can't remember. The new advancement chart is I'm pretty happy with. I got it tweaked out to where you get different things at certain time. Anyway. In any case, through advancement, your attributes can go up. Nothing new under the sun there either. D&D does that. Pathfinder, a bunch of other game systems do it in a similar way. I apologize. I've still got a little bit of this cough from this faux flu that I've had. That they're calling the false flu or whatever over the last couple 2.5 weeks or so. Ridiculous. Anyway, I apologize. Where was I? Attributes, yeah. So you start off with a total of +4 in character creation. The average like person in the world, like common or whatever, like probably +1 total from your culture, which I'll get to in a second. But player characters, like mini games, assume that you're not gods or heroes by any chance, but you're a little bit of cut above the rest, and that's why you kind of have chosen this kind of adventuring life, this life of being kind of a possible hero, a champion in the very least, or at least someone that goes out and explores and takes risks and daring do, and that people might sing tales and songs and sagas about later on. Is a best way to kind of frame a player character in general, and say Savage Kingdoms particularly. Um, so yeah, let me just take it back down to starting with agility. So that's equivalent to dexterity, right? And so that would start anywhere from you can start as low as a -3 in an attribute up to +3 technically, but each culture has what's called primary attributes, and you have 4 of them now. In the previous editions, you only had 3 primary, or what do I call them, favored attributes, meaning that you get a +1, but you can start with 1 point higher. So normally, for example, you could only start with as high as a physique of 3, but if you're from a culture that has physique as a favorite attribute, then you can start with a +4 if you want. Again, you still have to honor the total of +4. So if you have a +4 physique, all the other 5 attributes would have to be 0. Oh, well, not have to be. I'm just saying that's the way of looking at it. There could be one that's -2, and then anyway. So I'm just saying if you have a +4, you're grabbing a pretty big chunk there, so you have to kind of balance the rest of the character out. So yeah, start from anywhere from -3 up to +4 for favorite talent. There is a possibility you can actually start with a +5 and an attribute. And the way you would do that is to be from a culture or race that has a +1 favorite attribute and whatever it is that you want the +5 in, and then you would have to have a blood talent that gives you a another starting boost. Usually, there's a negative that goes with that also. For example, Trollborn gives you a +1 boost to your vigor or physique. I think you get to choose. And unfortunately, then you have to suffer also a -1 to intellect and magnetism. So yeah, and there's other blood talents that do similar things. There's like 10 or 11 other ones, or 12 others that do similar kind of things, allowing you to start with a +5 should you want to. All right, so next would be physique. Physique is it's like strength and size put together. So the closest D&D analogy is strength. But in Savage Kingdoms, it goes a little further, which is why I call it physique. Uh, it's strength mostly, but it's also your size. So, for example, you could play like this really kind of overweight character, or maybe even a really skinny character who happens to be maybe very wiry, and maybe that person's physique is higher than you would assume. Maybe it's +1, and actually the character is described as being kind of maybe even short and skinny or whatever. Maybe even having the waif weakness. Or you could do the opposite, like some really big guy that maybe not be really very strong, but he might be kind of big. Or yeah, so physique is kind of strength and your size put together. So it's kind of an average. And again, that can start as low as -3 and up to +3, 4, or even 5 with the right blood talent. So all the attributes are going to do the same. You can start no lower than they can never be lower than -3, or at least at character creation, and no higher than at the very max +5. The next attribute is vigor. So vigor, the equivalent to vigor would be constitution. So it is how vigorous the character is. And in Red Sun, I used vigor as like hit points or health. But in Savage Kingdoms, which has been around much longer than Red Sun, 12 years, going on 12 years, that means that's kind of like your constitution, how healthy you are, how resilient you are to pain and damage and that kind of stuff. So it's basically your constitution. And again, like the other two, you can start with as low as -3 and go up to start as high as +3, +4, or +5 in the case of 1 or 2 blood talents, which I think would be Giant Blood and Trollborn in this case. The fourth attribute, starting with the mental ones, would be intellect. So intellect is pretty much like it sounds, but just to give you a little insight on my design choice here. So growing up playing Dungeons and Dragons since like 1979, or maybe it was 80, but I think it was 1979. Wow. Dating myself there for sure. So going back to that game, and I've played it a million times, run it a million times for people. I run it professionally still. Um, and there, even through all of these years of experience and stuff, intelligence and wisdom, game mechanically, we know what it is. Even descriptively and narratively, we know mostly what it is. But both terms are very an amalgamation of several things, and they get really confusing to some people. So I decided to separate. People will often say, well, wisdom is kind of like your common sense. I'm like, well, it kind of, sort of. It's also willpower. So I separated the kind of common sense, street smart slash wood smarts of wisdom, and then also your education and your more traditional intelligence. Those are kind of all combined into intellect. So just to kind of show you where I'm coming from there. Uh, and then the next attribute would be magnetism. This is attribute number 5 or number 2 as far as the mental, spiritual ones go. Magnetism definitely is the closest thing to that would be charisma, or presence in some other games. So it is your magnetism, how magnetic you are to other people in the sense of like animal magnetism or how charismatic you are, and that sort of thing. So that would be your magnetism. And again, that's kind of like charisma. And it governs things like persuasion and performance. You can even take healing hands to if you're a healer, to use your magnetism attribute instead of your intellect, which kind of represents your bedside manner as far as the healer goes. So yeah, stuff like that. Um, and I'll get to more of that in a second. The sixth and final attribute, or the third of the mental ones, is willpower. And so, going back to that description I just talked about, separating parts of wisdom and giving that to intellect, the leftover part of that wisdom is willpower, right? And that's really what, whenever you're making a wisdom saving throw in D&D or something, 99% of the time it's because, or 90% of the time, because it represents willpower, mental resolve, right? Occasionally it might be something else that's more like perception or something like that, but for the most part, it's representing willpower, right? Mental resolve. So that's what it is in Savage Kingdoms. Willpower is it's its own thing. It's not really wisdom. I mean, you could describe your character as being wise if they're willful, and to some degree that would probably be correct in many cases. Um, but you could be a very willful character who's not very smart with a low intellect, or maybe even not very magnetic. So all the 6 attributes, just like the D&D ability scores, they're all uncoupled from each other, right? None of them are really related. That's why they're the big 6, right? So, all right, going on to derived traits. So those are the 6 primary attributes of Savage Kingdoms, and these haven't changed at all. These go all the way back to first edition 12 years ago, in 2014. So these are derived traits, and they are literally what they say. They are traits derived from the 6 attributes. Not entirely all attributes, I'll get to that in a second, but mostly from attributes. But they are derived from other statistics. Starting with the first one, I'm going to kind of go in order of the character sheet. I mean, see on the character sheet, which is kind of alphabetical for the most part. So there's initiative. Initiative is a derived trait. Initiative is your agility plus your willpower, plus whatever you roll on a d20. So it's agility plus willpower. So if you start with, say, a 3, say you have a +3 in agility and -1 willpower, that's a +2 in your initiative. There are several talents that add to initiative as well, such as cat-like reflexes and tactician, just off the top of my head. Those each add a +2, if I recall. I think there's 1 or 2 other talents that might do that too. Yeah, so nothing. Initiative is very similar to D&D. It's literally, it's a very military term. Whoever is claiming the initiative in what is about to be an engagement, not necessarily always a fight or a combat, but something that time needs to be measured very closely. So it could be an action scene, a chase scene, or something like that. It's not necessarily always triggering combat, but that's probably mostly what it's used for. In the end of at the end of the day, it's used to see who reacts first, who takes the initiative, and that's why it's agility for your quickness, but also willpower to represent your discipline, your mental discipline, your resolve. The next derived trait would be health. This is a big one, of course. Health is your hit points, if this were D&D or Pathfinder and several other games, OSR games and such. The term health is actually used in a lot of game systems, even more than hit points. So your health is derived from, the formula is 10 plus 2 times your physique plus your total modifier in endurance, the endurance skill. And part of the endurance skill is vigor, right? So vigor is part of that formula, because you might be thinking, why is it constitution or vigor in there in that formula? It is actually. But most of the formula is the 10, or actually, and then times 2 physique, because a bigger creature, this is just physics and biology, can take more damage overall 99% of the time than, say, a smaller creature might. And then your vigor plus your skill levels and endurance. So based on the character sheet, it says 10 plus PHY times 2 plus END, total endurance. So the average commoner has, you would think 10 is the average. It's really more like 11. Most commoners have like a +1 bonus in this setting, and like vigor, because they're usually doing a little bit more drudgery and stuff like that, and toil. And so the average commoner really has like 11 hit points. You would think it's 10, just thinking about everything being zeros, but it's actually probably more like 11. So the average player character, might start around there. I've even seen a few points lower. I've seen a lot higher, actually. I would say the average player character usually starts at around 12 or 13 health. Um, so because, it's fairly important statistics. And when you take damage in combat, physical damage, you take health damage, just like hit point damage. When you get to half your health, actually, and it's indicated on your character sheet, when you get to half your health, you're considered staggered. And staggered means you suffer -2 to all your die rolls, your mobility, and your defense. So there is a drawback to losing half your health, because at that point it represents. I think D&D called it bloodied, but it wasn't like, there's no longer like a game mechanic attached to it. It used to be kind of like in fourth edition, I think, or something, but in fifth edition might have a couple little things too, but but in fifth edition, bloodied is really more descriptive. It's just I use it to tell the players that, oh wow, okay, this guy's actually looking kind of hurt. He's at like half his hit points. So in Savage Kingdoms, it does represent it also, but there is a mechanical thing behind it. Now there's a talent called Grit. If you have Grit, if you succeed in, I believe it's a DR 15 endurance roll, resist pain specialty, if you happen to have that, then you stave off the effects of staggered, and you don't suffer the penalties. So pretty nice talent if you can afford to get it. And then when you get to 0 health, you are usually unconscious, but you do get an endurance roll against a DR of 10 plus whatever negative you are into hit points, because there we do track negative hit points up until negative of the half health. So in other words, on your character sheet, it'll list health. We'll say you have 14 health, and 7 would be your staggered, but -7 is your death number. So that second number is used for 2 different things. And you bleed out 1 point per round if you fail your endurance roll. So you could lay there a healthier person, because it's based on your endurance, which has vigor in it. Which makes sense. A healthier person probably isn't going to bleed out necessarily as quickly as a non-healthy person, maybe. So yeah, it's all there in the formula. If you critically fail that endurance roll while you're bleeding, because you have to roll every round when it's your turn, kind of like death saving throws in D&D, but a little more detailed and based mostly on your health instead of your luck, or your vigor instead of just pure luck. So if you critically fail that roll, you lose 2 points, you bleed out 2 health points, and that round, and you also suffer the lame, disfigured, or maimed weakness. And that's up to the game master, depending on what the predominant injury was that you were hit with. Like if you were slashed with a big axe or a heavy sword, it's probably going to be maimed, maybe lame, if you were described as maybe hit in the leg or something. Disfigured would be like mostly probably like fire, acid that did most of the damage to knock you out. Stuff like that. So in other words, don't critically fail that roll. If you critically succeed, you actually stop bleeding immediately and come conscious at 1 health point, which is kind of nice. So, right, moving on. So stamina is the next one. Stamina is a point pool, kind of like health. Whereas initiative was a bonus to a d20 roll, health is actually a pool of numbers, so you're never adding that to a d20 roll. And then stamina is the same thing as another pool of points, and these pool of points actually supply power or energy or fuel for spell casting mostly, but it also powers certain combat maneuvers, and there's a few other talents, special talents that are powered by stamina as well, such as seercraft, or berserker, or uh, there's a few others as well, even crafting things. Uh, stamina can, excuse me, stamina can also, like, it represents more like real life things, like actual stamina. Like if you, for every hour of crafting an item or working on something, it costs you 1 stamina point. Every hour of rowing a boat is a stamina, stuff like that. If you stay up an entire night without any sleep, you suffer -5 stamina for the first night. If you do 2 nights in a row, like if you don't sleep for 48 hours straight, you suffer -15 to your stamina, which puts most people at 0, but unless you have a really high stamina type character. And even then, you're going to be fatigued. Speaking of which, when you get to half your stamina, just like with health, you are what's called fatigued. And fatigued is pretty much the same penalty as being staggered. It's just flavored differently, right? One is more like physical injury, one is just like mental and spiritual lack of resolve or energy. And so anyway, when you get to half your stamina, you are fatigued. That's -2 to all die rolls and mobility, and they do stack. Unfortunately, so if you are staggered and fatigued, like half your health and half your stamina, that's -4 to all those rolls. So it could be kind of nasty, and that's on purpose. It is a dark. It is a fairly gritty um, simulation light game, so that might be what you would expect from such. Yeah, that's kind of the point, in other words. So, without being too overboard with it, but anyway, that's your stamina. I guess another thing about stamina would be that, oh yeah, it comes back 1 point per hour of rest in the campaign. In previous editions, I just kind of left it open, like, you tell the GM that we're going to try to rest for a couple hours in this clearing in the forest or in this tavern or whatever. And unless nothing happened, usually the GM would be like, yeah, so, those 2 hours easily pass, you get 2 stamina points. It still works that way, but I've ended up quantifying it a little bit by calling it a short rest. And I almost hated doing it because I don't want to, like, sound too D&D-ish, but most people kind of know that term. So a short rest is an hour, and it's mostly just to quantify what happens in that time. So you do gain 1 point of stamina back, assuming you have to be resting, though. So if you're up cutting firewood or skinning and a beast or something, you're working, right? You're not really resting. Um, yeah, so that's how you kind of adjudicate that. And then there's a talent called Meditative Trance that you can gain 2 stamina back, 2 stamina points back per hour, as long as you're kind of meditating and doing mostly rest, right? And then if you have a full night's sleep of stamina, regardless, even if you're down like 20 stamina points and you slept 8 hours, you've got all your stamina back, because it's presumed that a full night's decent sleep and rest will get it all back. Now I say 8 hours. 8 hours is like your typical, like, real world. Humans need typically 7.5, 8 hours, right? 8.5. Maybe 7. I know for me in real life, 7 to 7.5 is kind of the ballpark, but I think the average is like 8 hours, right? So that's called a long rest. So a long rest in Savage Kingdoms 4th Edition is actually 12 hours. So this is where it gets a little different from Dungeons and Dragons. So that's an 8 hour, I think, long rest is the standard long rest anyway, is 8 hours. And Savage Kingdoms, it is 12 hours. And the reason I did that is because it's a half day. And also, 12-hour means that you can eight of those hours have to be rest, or if you have the light sleeper talent, 6 hours have to be rest. Or if you're of Shi descent, if you're Dark Shi, Luna Shi, Wild Shi, you only need 6 hours of dream trance. So the rest of those hours can be doing stuff like keeping watch, or you're uh, walking off in the woods for an hour, just doing kind of normal. You're sitting around the campfire, but helping build the fire. Just kind of normal, cool stuff like that. And so all of that, 8 hours of which generally has to be sleep. The other 4 can be all the other stuff. That is considered a long rest. And to me, that has worked out much better. Because I think with the 8-hour rest, it works fine enough, but there were too many people kind of worried about, oh, well, you stood up and walked around for 10 minutes and now you got to restart. It's just like, that's not, when you're traveling on the road, you're doing more stuff than just sleeping, and you're preparing and you're eating and stuff like that. So the whole thing is a 12-hour long rest. All that to say, to get to the mechanical part of that, is like a 12-hour rest, you regain 1 health point, just flat 1 health point regardless. And obviously all your stamina would be back at that point too. Now, if you are in an area where you can do long-term care, this is part of the healing art skill, such as an inn or a temple, or possibly even, like, it's up to the GM. Even if you're in a nice campsite with like a tent and you're protected from the elements and stuff like that, when you're in a place like that, a safe area, you can recover health quicker by what's called long-term care. And you have to have somebody tending you to do that, because about every hour they have to change your bandages, they have to make sure you got food and water, all that kind of stuff. So if you get treated with long-term care, you actually heal every 12 hours, which is a long rest. You heal 2 plus your vigor and health points. So if your vigor is +2 or whatever, you could heal 4 health points in 12 hours, as long as you're getting really good long-term care. And that's pretty fast. That's actually faster than past. Normally you would get all that in like 24 hours in past editions, but it's still strenuous and, quote, realistic enough as it is with the new rule that I just went over, but also not super ridiculous like D&D, where apparently your arm comes back together after 8 hours if it was severed. Yeah, no, I know it's not what's really happening, but so somewhere in between those two things, I feel like, is kind of not only like semi-realistic or believable, but also gameable and like not too ridiculously over the top and taking forever to get healed, right? But again, it is a world where there are consequences and darkness, and I want the players to kind of feel like you can't hide, what I always call hide behind your hit points. Oh, I got 58 hit points. Uh, Even when I'm down to 57 points of damage, I still feel the same, and then I'll have them all back 8 hours later, assuming nothing horrible happens. So this is kind of a way to keep people from kind of hiding behind their health points or hit points, but at the same time not being super ridiculous about it. Just to continue the rest thing, a extended rest is a week. So 7 days is what's called an extended rest in Savage Kingdoms 4th edition. And that allows you to, take a downtime activity if you want. There's a whole list, several pages of those in the book. And also you're healed of all of your health points at that point, and any other like poison, any other conditions. And it does say there is a caveat, with the exception of anything that goes beyond that. Like if there's a certain supernatural creature, demon or something very powerful, that might inflict you with a curse or something, that's probably a definite. That's going to keep going unless you can find it magically, get it removed, or just ignore it for the rest of your adventuring career. But most things after an extended rest is going to be over with. So you're fresh, clean slate for the most part, probably 98% of the time after a extended rest. All right, so moving on, I think. Oh yeah, just really quick. So stamina, to finish the stamina thing. So when you get to half, that's fatigued. I talked about that, right? When you get to 0 fatigue, you are considered exhausted. So exhausted is -4 to all your die rolls, mobility, and defense. So that means you're really, and it's literally the word exhaust. You're completely spent. I almost called it spent actually, but we just stuck with exhausted. Fatigued is the lesser one when you get to half. Right. So moving on to what was that? That was stamina. The next derived trait would be mobility. So mobility is your speed. This is I think I'm the only game I've ever seen that uses the term mobility. I'm sure there's a bunch of others that do. Just haven't seen one. Most games usually call it speed or movement or move rate. I decided to call it mobility just to be different. And the formula for mobility currently is 6 plus your agility or physique, whichever is higher. Meaning that either you're fast because you're like really quick and dexterous, or you're fast because you have really strong legs. In previous editions, you added both of those together, but it doesn't work out with the new 3-action system that I'll get to in a later video. So it's either or now. And the reason I say currently it's 6 plus agility or physique, I'm leaning heavily towards it being 5 the base. I think it makes more sense, and Yeah, so it's probably going to end up when the book gets the core rule books gets published. It'll probably end up being 5 plus agility or physique. So cool. Um, right, and so that's how many yards you can move. So Savage Kingdoms is a yard-based system, not a feet-based system like in D&D. You got most people have a speed of 30, means you can dash 60. In SK, the average mobility would be 6, but usually it's skews maybe towards 7, and so that's 7 yards per action, and action is roughly like 2 seconds because you get 3 actions in a 6-second combat round. So you can see it's a little bit on the fast side, which is why I might pull it back a yard. I also like the fact that on the character sheet it says 5 plus whatever, and then when you look at the next trait that I'm about to talk about, luck, it's also 5 plus something. It just looks kind of neat, you know. Um, so half of your mobility is your sneak speed. Sneak and swim is half, and then 1/3 is climb, and that is in yards. And I will tell you what's in my head right now. I've been going back and forth and making climbing mobility, climbing mobility or climbing speed being feet based because typically in real life, or at least my weirdness, you measure buildings, you measure typically in feet, right? You don't really use yards, right? Yards are more for land, big overland chunks. That's why they exist, right? It's the length of a stride. I mean, it's actually your fingertip to the end of your to your fingertip is actually, but it ends up being about the length of of a decent stride as well. So that's why a lot of people will call yards paces sometimes because they're pretty close anyway, or strides or something like that. And that is why the base movement in Savage Kingdoms, your base type of mobility is what I call stride. Because I don't like walk. Walk sounds lazy. I might just go back to calling it base, but right now it's called stride. That's your base mobility when you're on land, walking, striding, that sort of thing. Just sounds cooler too, right? Yeah, so that's mobility. Like I said, climb is 1/3 in yards, but I might end up making it in feet, which means you can use the whole number, right? Because 1/3 is of a yard is a foot, right? So it kind of works out. But having the two different types of measurements is kind of weird to me. So right now, as it currently stands, your climbing mobility is still in yards, which isn't too hard. Say your climbing mobility is 2, and you're like 2, that's 6 feet. So I can get 6 feet up the side of this building or up this tree in a couple seconds, which is yeah, pretty relatively believable. So your sneak mobility, like I said, is half. I think there's a talent called quick stealth that you can go faster. Um, what's the other? Swim, right? It's the other type of movement. Crawling is also half. It's all on the character sheet there, but just to kind of let you know what all of that means, which is the point of the video, right? Right. So that's mobility. So creatures with 4 legs and bigger horses are the obvious example. They're going to have mobilities. I think they're like 12 to 15. I can't remember, 13, 12 or 13, as you would imagine. And they can actually spread up to 5 or gallop up to times 5 as 3 actions. So they can halt. That's kind of the reason for them, right? Other than they're cool. And camels and stuff like that, and then more exotic creatures that PCs might eventually find, young wormling dragons or a bear that they've tamed or might have started with as a beast companion from that talent, or even a dire wolf or something like that. So all very cool potentialities. So that's mobility. The next trait, the next derived trait would be luck. So luck is pretty interesting. The character creation, you start with 5 plus your intellect or magnetism. Um, and the reason that's the thing is because, so first of all, luck in the setting means, it can either mean what we normally call it in the real world, like modern day, where it's like, oh, you're just like lucky. Oh my God, you lucked into it. But it can also mean more what it kind of used to do back in the olden times, particularly with the Vikings. When they said somebody was lucky, they were basically saying you're favored of the gods, like, or some power has favored you. Um, and you can look at it either way. You could be like, luck, I'm this guy that kind of just happens to be in the right place at the right time, or I'm this person that's favored by a deity or two or several or something. So yeah, you can flavor it how you want to. all that to say, that's why it says intelligence or magnetism is the modifier to the base 5 luck. Because intellect means that you're that type of guy that kind of skims through everything at the last minute. That's usually quick thinking, improvisational thinking. And then there's also the magnetism version, which is a very charismatic person. And, we've all known those kind of people in our lives too. That just kind of always sort of very calmly sort of gets their way out of everything, right? So that's the magnetism sort of lucky person. So either or there. And so luck exists to be a cool game mechanic. You can only spend up to 3 per session, by the way. You can spend a luck point to gain a extra action in combat. You can spend a luck point to take 5 points less damage should you get smacked pretty hard. Um, you can use it. Probably the most common is you can use it to re-roll. So you roll a d20 because remember in Savage Kingdoms it's all d20. It's the only dice you use. And you weren't happy with the result. You probably failed. You might even critically failed. So you spent a luck point to re-roll. In past editions, you had the option to take +5 instead of. I got rid of that because it became a little meta-y, a little metagamey, to kind of math it out and go, well, if I take the +5, that probably. So now it's just like you just get to re-roll. You can also spin it to be in the right place at the right time, like have some minor thing happen that you can change in the story. Like, this horse that I found tied up to the trees, does it happen to have a saddle on it? If the GM doesn't know, he might say, well, you spend a luck point, there's a saddle on it. You could also, at the GM, because I do this mostly a lot, instead of having spend a luck point, I'll make them make a luck roll. In this case, you roll d20 plus the character's current luck, and if they succeed, usually it's DR10, but if it's something that's maybe would be more difficult, that you would have to have really good luck to do, that might be DR15, difficulty rating 15. Otherwise, you need to roll a 15. But usually it's a 10. So in that case, like, does this horse happen to have a saddle? Make a luck roll if you DR10. 12, cool. Yep, it does. But it's mostly would be stuff for like, I've had player characters leave stuff at home, or stuff that they probably would have, oh man, I left my. Can I make a luck roll to see if I happen to bring my shield with me? Because normally I don't, but maybe in this case I might have. And then I might say, yeah, make a luck roll to see if you remember. At that point, you could also make them make an intellect roll to see if because smarts, right? Yeah. Anyway, so that's luck, and you can only spend 3 per session, and that's to keep people from going completely nova. With 8 luck points, which you probably wouldn't want to anyway, because luck does not come back every session, like in a lot of games, including my Red Sun game, which is you have 3 fate points per session. Luck is only comes back from advancement, so every advancement that you get is you earn a luck point, which is great. There's other ways too. Mostly it's through religious ways, like making offerings to gods and stuff, because again, luck does represent favored of supernatural things. So there are ways in a downtime, but also occasionally in an actual game session where you might gain a +1. Like, in fact, I think that happened in a session I ran last week for my one of my groups. But yeah, so that's luck. The caveat to that, there is a talent called, I think it's Favorite of the Gods, or maybe it's just called Divinely Favored. But in any case, you can spend up to 4 luck points per game session, and you start with +1 additional luck. So that's kind of cool. All right, so moving on, that was the next derived trait would be defense. So defense comes in 2 varieties, but kind of 3. And I might change some things. That's why I'm kind of saying kind of. So dodge is, but first of all, dodge is the number that someone has to hit. It's kind of like your armor class in D&D. Except for it's not, because it's not. It's mostly how you completely avoid damage, whether it's parrying or dodging, regardless of armor. Armor is a different thing. So, excuse me, your dodge defense is 10 plus your total in acrobatics. Acrobatics has agility in the formula. So let's say you have +1 agility, and you started with 1 skill level in acrobatics, so that's +2 total. So you'd have a dodge defense of 12. And now let's say, and then there's parry defense. Parry defense is 10 plus your total modifier and melee weaponry, which has physique in the formula. So say your physique is +2, and you have 2 skill levels in melee weaponry. So that's a 14, parry defense of 14. Now you can only use parry when you actually have a weapon or shield in hand, something to parry with. Otherwise, you have to use dodge. And dodge only works against range attacks as well, unless you have a cool, fancy little ability called parry missiles, where you can actually parry ranged attacks, arrows and daggers and stuff like that, which is cool. Then there's kind of a secondary or tertiary defense called shield defense. And basically, your shield defense is your parry defense, but if you have a shield boosts your defense by +1 to +3, depending on the size of the shield. Buckler's +1, medium shield is +2, large shield is +3. Most people tend to be in the medium, so going back to our example, if your parry defense is 14, if you're wielding a shield, in this case, it would be 16. And shield works against any kind of physical attack. In the previous edition, I made shields part of your armor kit, and I still might go back to that because it's actually kind of easier to deal with. But narratively, it's not as satisfying. So I'm still kind of waffling back and forth on that. So we'll see. But yeah, those are the 3 types of defenses. Some caveats to that would be, let's see, trying to parry with your open hand. So that's going to be at a -4 but if you're really good at brawling, you can actually get it up there. And I think there's a talent too that means you can parry empty-handed with only a -2 penalty to your parry defense. So for the most part, you're going to need a weapon or shield in your hand to really do it well. And then, all right, so get to arm. So this is not a derived trait, but it's part of the defense suite that we just went over. So armor, right? So if they roll above your defense, say somebody rolls a 15 against your dodge defense of 12, that's 3 points of damage, minus whatever armor you have. So let's say you have a hard leather cuirass. That's 2 points of armor, so you subtract 2 points, and in that scenario I just gave you, you'd only take 1 point of damage. So subtract 2 from 3. That simple, done. So Savage Kingdoms is faster in the sense that one roll does damage and everything, so much faster than running all these dice with D&D. However, it does have one extra step with armor, whereas D&D does not, because it's all part of the armor class. So it's still probably, SK is probably still a little faster than D&D as far as combat, but not like massively so, probably because of that extra step. But that extra step is totally worth it, which is why I've kept it in there. Another caveat to damage, just to kind of round this out really quick, is called armor piercing. Armor piercing is just a fancy term for bonus damage. So for example, let's say if you get hit with a battle axe, a person's wielding it in 2 hands. That is armor piercing 2 for most battle axe, for a normal battle axe. And you hit for 3 points of damage, like an example I just gave. Armor piercing 2 means it's 5. Guy's wearing hard leather armor, 2 points of protection. He took 3 points of damage. So yeah, so bigger weapons with armor piercing is dealing more damage, as it should be, as one might expect. I think it's it. I think that's all of the derived traits. I believe, I'm hoping that I covered them all. And this video went on a little bit longer than I thought, but I felt like it was pretty cool. Hopefully you liked it too. Hopefully you made it to the end of the video, and I'll do a couple more of these videos. Maybe I'll make them shorter. I actually thought about doing attributes as its own video and then derived traits in another one, and I was like, I'll just do them both, but I don't know. Here we are. Cool. Thanks for hanging in there, guys, and hopefully you learned a little bit about that, and talk to you again soon.